Is there an entrepreneur inside of you? Well, my guest today shares her story of not only how she figured out that there was, but then what she did with that idea and that learning after she figured it out. I'm Carl White, principal at Market Advisory Group, which is a healthcare marketing agency, and I'm also the host of Practice Care. And the mission for both is to help private practice owners stay private. Not only is that what they really want, but let's face it, I really believe that care is better when it's just you and your provider, and there's nobody else secretly sitting at the table whispering in the provider's ear with their agenda, like a hospital or a health system or distant owners, whoever they may be. When it's just you and your doctor, things get better. And today, my guest is Dr. Ashley White. Dr. Ashley White is an industry leader in challenging the weight as health dogma. Her groundbreaking work with responsive eating has encouraged a critical shift in the medical field in the way people with larger bodies are perceived and treated. As a trusted clinician, educator, and parent, Dr. Ashley White's mission is to use her signature methodology of responsive eating to facilitate appetite literacy so that people in larger bodies can unlearn, push back against, and liberate themselves from diet culture. She is a family and emergency medicine doctor by training and is a diplomate of the American Board of Obesity Medicine, though she's quick to point out that she does not use the term obesity in regular practice. Dr. Ashley White, thank you for coming on Practice Care.
Thank you, Carl. I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, it is great to have you here. So we kind of got a teaser in your bio that you are not a lifelong entrepreneur per se, but you are one now. So anytime there's big twists and turns in somebody's career, I know I get interested and it can be usually helpful for a lot of others. So give us that journey, take us from all the way up to you have this idea for a different kind of clinic, pushing back against lots of dogma, to the kernel of the idea for Dr. Ashley White Clinic.
Thank you. Yeah. So in running a large family practice, it varied between about 1,000 and 1,500 patients. And I worked in a practice care model in Canada where I was paid an annual sum of a small amount to take care of a patient, plus a small amount of billing to the government every time I saw them. When you're caring for that many people, even though I did have a physician assistant for some time, the demands on your time are so profound because we're managing mostly complex metabolic disease while also providing, and of course I was in a small town, I grew up in a small town, I'm a rural person. I was also managing cradle to grave. So everything prenatal, postnatal, well babies, palliative care, as well as practicing in the emergency room as is typically required of many rural generalists. And I felt this constant problem of not being able to get to the root of what was a wave of metabolic disease. And not only metabolic disease, but also really distressing experiences that people were having with food. And I recognize this distress as a source of a lot of mental health concern. And I recognize it as a source of friction in people's lives. We're talking about, unfulfilled intimacy. We're talking about stigma at work, stigma at home. We're talking about partnerships that were breaking down because the stress of life, of modern life, was providing so much pressure on whole body metabolic systems, as well as the experience of eating, that people were finding themselves continuously ill. And my 8-minute appointments were not sufficient. I worked in an area without endocrinologists, without any sort of bariatricians. And then the more I saw this problem, the more overwhelmed I became by my scarcity of time. And opportunities for people in larger bodies to have access to affordable care that has a therapeutic element, but also a growth element, a change element, as well as pharmacology for being in a larger body, pharmacology for metabolism. There is this space in primary care where you can work on both coaching through mental health, you can work on creating eating experiences that are values aligned and really serve the purpose that that person brings to this earth, as well as saying, okay, well, it does look like there's some metabolic urgency here. There are some ways to really deal with that. So being able to operate along this full spectrum of metabolic medicine while also being really interested in my patients' experiences of change and growth. I couldn't do it in a normal practice. I couldn't. And then some personal circumstances led to me moving away from my community. And I had started running a bit of a pilot for my appetite clinic inside of my family practice, learned a lot from that over about a year and a bit, and then sort of leveraged this all into a business, which has a for-profit element, which is certainly learning from my American counterparts, and then also a publicly funded component, which is my direct physician service. And that's how this came about. And so I, the tools for virtual business have always been compelling to me. I think probably I've always been an entrepreneur, but I didn't know it. And I have taken the risk of launching this clinic, buttressed, of course, by my ability to still practice part-time emergency medicine to soften this experience.
Right. Yeah. And it's sad in a way that the American model and the Canadian model share this complete lack of proper time for a primary care appointment. We say 7 to 10 minutes. Sounds like it's very similar. And it's the front line. It's supposed to, stave off a lot of downstream need, catch things early. It all sounds great on paper, but it just falls apart in reality.
I have people on 10 to 20 medications, and I can't do anything but pharmacology in my appointment with that much time.
Really. Yeah. It's really something. And so was the metabolic symptoms and the metabolic diseases and things that you were seeing, was that a majority of your patients, or they just were the ones that required the most time?
Probably an inordinate amount of my time was required to work with that group of people. And I'm not talking about all these people didn't have large bodies, right? Some of these people were thin people with metabolic disease. Like, this happens. Metabolic disease occurs across a spectrum of body.
Right.
But either way, most of it was underpinned by this like high stress environments that were building out these relationships with food that were really hurting people.
Yeah.
And there is no SSRI for that. I mean, maybe there is in some contexts. Some proper treatment of mood disorders is important, but who better to navigate the proper treatment of mood disorders, the proper treatment of metabolic disease, and sort of this deepened relationship than primary care.
Yeah. If only to have the time.
Yeah. And so, there's Noom, and a lot of people sort of, when I launched, people were like, oh, are you just doing Noom? And I was like, Noom is on a scale of therapeutics. They offer sort of coaching, but it's like many to one. And they offer, they present therapeutic principles to patients, but they are still very enmeshed in calorie restriction, calorie counting, good foods and bad foods. That paradigm has not shifted for them. And I was interested in some very paradigm shifting work that was in line with the evidence for what it means to be in a larger body. And I knew that in the context of a family practice, in order to help people shift their perspective around what it means to be in a larger body, what it means to choose whether weight loss is an appropriate pursuit. I did not have that space, and I craved that space so much. And I could see with the onset of GLP-1s. So these are like your Ozempics, your Wegovy's, your molecules that are basically turning the pharmaceutical factories, they're running out of supplies because they're so popular. People are having pretty impressive appetite suppression on these medications. But then, and so what, right? And then what? So your appetite is suppressed, but it doesn't necessarily mean the metabolic disease is changing, because it's possible that your eating experiences are still very distressed. And so there's this really beautiful complement where we can work on these ideas and these concepts using a framework that I call responsive eating, and support people who are not yet, interested in bariatric surgery or not able to pursue bariatric surgery. And I actually have several patients who are post bariatric surgery and have experienced a lot of weight gain in the interim.
Right. So Cool stuff. But let's go back a bit.
Mm.
So you've got this idea of something's got to change, and you've got this inner kind of drive to do something. What drove you to turn this idea into an actual practice, right? Because we were talking
Mhm.
before we started, we all have these nagging feelings, and some you can identify and some you can't. Most people probably blow off most of them. So there's a small subset that remain, some of which you can identify, some you can't. It's like it takes a lot for a nagging feeling to turn into a tangible idea, to turn into a practice, and you're doing it, you've done it. So
Mhm.
what drove you? Like what drove you to take this idea and say, I need to do something with this, not just, go back to work tomorrow like anything, like nothing's changed.
Yeah, I've always been very responsive to that inner urge for a shift. My whole life I've shifted in this way. So I knew that my ideas were novel. And I knew that the community of people practicing, even within obesity medicine, were not necessarily sharing these ideas widely, even if they agreed with them. Um, I also have always been interested in creative ways to share a message, creative ways to work with people one-on-one. The pandemic enabled the adoption of virtual care, even by patients who are in super rural areas who really were not internet literate prior. And
Mm.
I think the shift for me came because I knew I was moving. And so I had the opportunity just to like open another traditional practice in another town, totally an option.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, why
all
didn't you
of
do that?
yeah, all of well, because I definitely knew that my skills as an entrepreneur are in creativity, they're in strategy, they're in visioning, and they're in seeing that things could be different than they are. And I have this pretty compelling optimism to say, well, this current system is clearly not working. I believe there is another way. I will not get trapped in the negativity of there not being another way to do a good primary care.
Mhm.
And I also know that, my strengths as an entrepreneur are in this strategic space. They are
Okay.
not in the space of operations, particularly when it comes to HR. I really struggle to understand how to manage people. Um, and I don't know that I fully appreciated that when I went into medicine. I didn't know that I would become a manager of people when I opened my own practice, but that's what you are, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I thought, okay, well, I bet I can leverage a number of virtual systems, a number of time-saving systems to automate my ability to work with a small number of people intensely over 8 weeks. Um, that's publicly funded time augmented by the purchase of products. So I knew that in order to turn this into a financially sustainable model, I need to both productize my knowledge as well as provide service-based knowledge, which is the
Right.
provision of care.
Right.
And so I needed to say, okay, I need to have intimate relationships with all of these patients, but I also need to um, get my time back, right? I
Right.
don't want to be slaughtered by time,
Mm-hmm.
time scarcity. So I envisioned this intake followed by 6 group sessions, followed by an outtake or a discharge appointment.
Mm-hmm.
So I have 8 weeks to work intensively with people, and 8 weeks is plenty of time to establish a really strong clinical relationship.
Right.
Every patient gets 45 minutes of FaceTime with me. And then all of that is buttressed on the back end by a number of really smart virtual systems such that I don't need staff.
Mm-hmm.
And such that I'm off,
That's the holy grail right there.
yeah. So I'm operating with about 5 hours a week of a virtual assistant, essentially just for phone calls.
Mm-hmm.
And that person is going to end up growing into a larger role as we expand the product offerings.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, I'm offering clinical services based on a system of thought, and also the direct care provision of medicine around the area that I work
Right.
in. Um,
So for you then, the drive to turn this idea into a practice is the drive was there. You said it. It was
yeah, I
you've been
mean,
driven for change.
oh,
You've known this.
yeah, like I'm so change oriented. I've I suffered as a person in a larger body as a youth, as an adolescent, and again when I started med school. Medical school was really really difficult for me to sort of get through in the absence of distressing eating experiences. But I did. And then I gained quite a bit of weight throughout my training and experienced pretty profound weight stigma. And then I lost weight. And then that the way that I was treated and processed by both my patients and colleagues was pretty dramatically different, even though I was a better doctor and a smarter person after. But this is weight stigma. It really affects people. I grew up in a family of people for whom being in a large body and is part of the experience. So not only was I compelled to change because I saw that my patients were suffering, but I felt this intimately. Like this is an experience that I feel needs a lot of refresh of the thought leadership and the work that we do, particularly among physicians. So when you combine this purpose with the ability to leverage digital staffless systems, and the ability to productize the work that you do, you all of a sudden have an ecosystem where you can do creative, flexible, good work on your terms. And I think I guess a lot of people are scared of those kinds of things, and they don't become entrepreneurs, and they stay within existing systems, and they make lots of money. Sure. I believe I can also, make money doing this, and I obviously I intend to. But there are risks, right? Because this is a slow process. I'm building. The major difference is that I can enroll patients from anywhere who speak English. So I have the ability to not only care for people in my province, which is for whom their care is publicly insured, but I can provide care anywhere.
Yeah. So sort of teasing the lessons out there, if out of what you said is, first, you got to have something that says, I could do X better or differently, and then it would be better. And you've got to really believe that to a point. And then the second part is, at least that I took away, was, risks are a fact of life. And one mantra I use is, I look at something and the moment I realize I'm uncomfortable, because you can do something for a while or contemplate and not realize that, but the moment I say that feels uncomfortable, then I must try. And then, the risk is, would I bet my company on X? Probably not. But if it feels uncomfortable to try it, is there an exit ramp? Yes. Where you could say, well, if this isn't working, I can stop it, or there's a way to whatever that mitigates the risk, then go, because either it'll work or you'll learn a path that doesn't, you'll learn some other things along the way. I feel like every month, a few times a year, easily, there's like some big learnings for me, because you're never done learning. No matter how good it looks from the outside looking in. My joke is, I'm going to let you think that, because it's fine, but there's the hamster wheels behind the scenes or whatever else that haven't quite figured that out yet. And I think it's true.
Oh yeah. And I think this idea of intrapreneurship is important, where you build out a pilot in what you're currently doing. Test the offering, see if it flies. And I got a lot of really good feedback from my pilot. So I kept the stuff that was good and I left the stuff that wasn't. And honestly, the stuff that's good is the stuff where I'm in session delivering. And then I turn that into a product, right? So I can monetize without my presence. And then I essentially said, I actually need to have a strong degree of control over the message here, because the change requires patients to experience certain shifts. And there are only so many people who you can trust to operationalize that message. And so the next steps, when I think about, okay, well, how do I continue to take pressure off me time-wise, because I'm expecting another baby.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But how do I take pressure off me time-wise while expand the revenue? Both of those things are important, right? And I mean, do I sound like, a bad doctor for caring about monetization of my work? I think that corporations would have us believe that. I think that there is major value in demonizing the doctor who cares about their income. But these are the same conversations that insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies are having, right? Like these are conversations that they would like us not to have. Because they recognize that we are operating in this space for a reason. We have a value add, and our ability to connect with human beings
Yeah.
is really, really powerful. So then the other thing is, okay, so then how do you grow this without working 150 hours a week? And how do you grow this without just replicating, you have a different master,
Yeah.
right?
So is that
And
something you're working on now?
oh yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
looking at, well, how do I bring on other providers to
Mm.
to do the work and to
Hmm.
give them an opportunity to like live in this beautiful clinical space that I feel like I'm in. It's
Right.
beautiful. Oh, I love it. It's enabled by some amazing tech for sure.
Hmm.
And then how do I license to other organizations or other providers, maybe non-physician providers, but dietitians who are interested in a system for
Hmm.
change and bringing a system into their clinical practice. So
Right.
that would be my next. And I'm also enrolled in a coaching, professional coaching training program, because the skills of coaching
Hmm.
are what I get time to actually use in
Right.
my longer appointments, which is delightful.
Right.
And then I just had this thought when you said one of the core ingredients was recognizing that things could be different.
Hmm.
I think what I'm seeing, and I'm interested to see what you think, I'm seeing a lot of people, some female physicians, because all the female physicians in Canada are on a Facebook group together. So we learn from each other. And there is so much frustration with the current state that there has to be enough tension in that current state that they would be willing to take an enormous risk.
Hmm.
And I think that we're getting there
Hmm.
because of certainly the complexity and the demands of patients, but also the world that we are in.
Yeah.
When I am seen as the deliverer of health, it's, if you position me as the person who owns your health and I get to give it to you, then there will never, ever be enough of me. And that's the
Correct.
system that we have.
Yeah.
And so I need to operate from a place of, I'm happy to co-create this journey with you. I am
Hmm.
actually not responsible for your change. And you can only set that expectation when you have a very, very clear, contained practice that
Yeah.
doesn't take all comers, because otherwise you will be sucked dry of energy and life.
Yeah. Well, that's like a night and day difference from the primary care practice that you were in. Somebody calls and makes an appointment and you have to take them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Even though any provider of anything, whether healthcare or otherwise, um, has certain things that they're good at. It's just nobody's good at everything. And even if you had the amount of time you want for every patient, there still would be limits on how effective you can be, because somebody can walk in with some off the wall, whatever you've never seen before, but now they're your patient. Whereas now you are, this is like a really important marketing question. Who's your market? Is it
Mm-hmm.
anybody who wants to lose weight? No. Is it anybody? Not really. There's more characteristics to it. And the idea, it's something that a lot of practices, a lot of businesses skip over, is who really can we serve best?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Either because they don't think about it, or it's not easy to tease out, or it's fearful to say no to anybody, either, conceptually or actually. But
Mm-hmm.
you find, yeah, I mean, if so, let's make it up. You've got a client now who fits the description. It's just that they don't do the homework, they don't do the follow through, for example, and they're not taking on their responsibility. Um, you know, what are you supposed to do? I mean, eventually they're just not. You're not the best fit for them.
Oh, that's right.
You
Yeah.
know.
And right now the vast majority of my clients are publicly funded, right?
Hmm.
So I've got clients who actually don't have, so to speak, skin in the game, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Because they don't actually provide direct money to me, but they pay taxes, obviously, so they're entitled to that care.
Hmm.
Um, and then I also have a handful of private pay clients. Obviously, the balance will change over time,
Hmm.
and I'm interested to see the levels of engagement and how they differ. I have been very impressed that we had so far, I've had 100% attendance at all of my sessions, and no one has been late. And there have been no no-shows.
There you go.
And
It's a good start.
that never happens in
Yeah.
primary, ever.
Yeah.
And I I feel as though that is an indicator. That's a good sign. That's a good direction to
It's
be
a
in.
good start. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
definitely a good start. Yeah. Um, Very interesting stuff. And I say this to a lot of folks who come on as guests. We could go for a long time, but
Oh,
in the interest of kind of, yeah, bringing us to the finish line, a couple of questions I ask every guest. The first
mhm.
one is, now that you've heard the questions in our conversation, is there anything you think that I should have asked you that would benefit listeners who are, they're sitting in an idea, a gnawing feeling, what do I do? Should I do anything with it? Anything I should have asked you, but just didn't?
Yeah, well, given your expertise in marketing, it's possible that there's a discussion to be had about, okay, well, how do I market myself? Given that this is a global economy and I'm not in the US,
Right.
but I can serve US clients.
Hmm.
And so the way that I market myself right now is obviously through my goal is to do mostly through relational work like this. So
Hmm.
having conversations with people who are interested in the space.
Hmm.
And then thought leadership. So really building out some of the content on my site,
Yeah.
using social channels, and then earned media
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
but, as a solo, okay, well then you actually don't want to spend all of your time just being a marketer.
Hmm.
And is that your highest and best use? So this is probably another source of friction when it comes to opening up your own clinic, particularly a clinic where you can serve a large audience
Yeah.
that may end up being licensed one day, but where your work is going to be codified in books and keynotes and yada yada.
Yeah.
Is how do you spend your time? What is the trade-off between marketing time and non-marketing time?
Hmm.
I think it's an important, obviously, that it's an important conversation. So yeah, I'm still working through that.
Yeah. The short answer, an incomplete answer, is depending on what kind of goal you set for yourself. So if you said is going to dictate that balance of work on the practice versus work in the practice. So
Mhm.
if you said, in 3 years, I want to be 5 times the size I am now, whatever that is, already I would say to myself, well, then that work on the practice time, it can't be an afterthought. So all these things that you talked about operationalizing and outsourcing, to tech and different things, trying to bring on other providers so that they can deliver the sessions, deliver the work fulfillment, while you continue to, build the brand, grow the awareness, convert the awareness. It just takes it takes more time because nobody nobody decides on choosing you or me ever as fast as we want them to and not
Yeah,
nearly ever choose, even if slowly. And so it's just this
no,
never ending thing. The other thing about marketing is whatever you choose to do, I'd rather see you pick one or two things and do them consistently than pick 5 things and start. If
absolutely.
you're going to go start, just don't start. Save your time and money unless you can commit to it. And that usually means for when you're a smaller shop is pick one or two things, don't overthink it, and do it consistently until it either starts working or your gut says, I don't think this is working. And then you can
Mhm.
stop and pick something else. But consistency is the key. No matter what you do, paid, earned, social, organic, whatever, carrier pigeons, whatever, it's got to be done consistently. So
I cannot agree more. And that's one of the critical lessons. And specifically when something does not work, I do not take it personally
yeah, look
because
at it this
this
way.
is
You found a way that doesn't work. My God,
right.
it's call it failure. I don't really, I these
Yeah.
heavy words that people worry about the word. It's this, it's that. It's a failure. No, it wasn't failure. Whatever, man. You found something that didn't work. Learn from it. Try to tease out why. And maybe
Right.
it was that just doesn't work, or I didn't do it quite right, or whatever. Whatever. Take the learning and move on.
And I don't think anyone should quit their day job while they're doing this. Sorry, I don't think everyone should not quit their day job. But I was able to put my day job in its place.
Yeah.
Right. And I think as physicians, we are super fortunate that we can do a little bit of traditional medicine to pay the bills
Yeah.
while we create space with other things. There's a few careers that really enable us to do that.
Yeah.
And this is one of them. So it's
Yeah.
like a lovely opportunity, right?
Yeah. And if you're starting out, I mean, the classic advice is try to get a few clients before you leave whatever it is you're doing
Yeah.
now. And if you can pull that off, do it.
Gold.
Because whatever benefits you get, they're going to be worth it.
Mm.
So yeah. And then the other question I ask guests that come on is, so picture folks who are listening who are where you were, this kernel of idea, not sure what it is. Um, but they feel like it just keeps gnawing. What are one or two things you would tell them to do with that idea, with that gnawing feeling, as soon as they're done listening to this?
You should hire a very good business coach who will help you interrogate the idea, who will help you clarify who you're talking to, who will help you clarify your pitch and clarify your offering. And then figure out very, very clearly what your strengths and weaknesses are. Play to your strengths, hire for your weaknesses. Be willing to go there, bet on yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are always things that we are going to pursue control over as clinicians. That is our way. But we have to accept that we will be bad at some things and figure out what those are.
Yeah.
Get out of your own way.
Yeah. And then just start attacking it at whatever pace you can do.
Pilot it again. Be willing to learn, find the right software, which I'm very fortunate to have done. I think it changes.
Yeah. Right. There's no shortage of choices in that world.
No.
Yes. Well, Ashley, thank you. Thank you again for coming on. This has been really, hugely interesting and hopefully helpful to lots of people who are listening. Yeah. And we will put all of your contact information in the show notes so that anybody who wants to learn more about Ashley or contact her to ask a follow-up question, join her tribe. It is going to be easy to find. And a couple of other points just before we wrap up. If you are like Ashley, or you've got an experience on the business side of your practice that you think you've really cracked the code on something and you think others would benefit from knowing what you've learned, we really want you to come on Practice Care and share your ideas with the world. On the website for the Practice Care, as well as in the show notes, there's a link and instructions on where you can go, fill out the form, tell us what you've got so that we can get you scheduled as soon as possible. And then finally, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to Practice Care on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks again, and until next time.